Salutaters, my potats, it is I, Rave, and I am back with another episode of Read with Rave, a series in which I read books or short stories written by myself or by some of my friends. A couple of small disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1, I have already gotten permission from my friends to read their books or short stories so as to avoid copyright. That being said, I will have links to their social media down in the description below. Disclaimer number 2, these books and short stories are not meant for children. The average audience is teens or young adults, so if you are a young child, please jump off this video and return when I have gaming or art videos. Today, I will be reading The Crossroads Planet, Book 1 of the Crossroads series by Robert Field. Chapter 13. In the guard room adjacent to the west gate in the outer wall of the campus, Lance and Crystal sat together with small bundles of clothing and other necessities. Outside of the gate, horses were saddled and ready to ride. "I've ridden horses before," Lance was saying. "Has thee ridden a horse before ever, love?" "One summer, when I was 16, I spent some time at a summer camp located on a planet with a large area of land allowed to remain in its natural state. It was located in an area of mountainous terrain, and I spent many hours riding horseback over the miles of trails established on the many hundreds of acres the camp was situated on. I had never ridden before that, and I have not ridden since. I am afraid that my riding skills will have deteriorated to a great extent." "Well, you know how to ride. It will come back to thee. Thee may be sore when we get there. For that matter, I may be sore too." Their escorts were packing some provisions and the other baggage onto a pack horse and generally preparing to get under way. Lance patted his pouch, which contained a note to the factotum of the training compound. Lance and Crystal stepped up to where the horses were. The guard held the stirrups for Lance and Crystal to mount. The escort assumed the front and rear positions, while Lance and Crystal rode side by side in the middle. The group set off on the trip, slowly and quietly while still near town, then picking up the pace after they were away from the inhabited parts. They took the northern road out of town, and soon were ascending the long, lazy switchbacks on the wide carriage road that led up the way to the northern pass. After over an hour's ride, and still only beginning the main ascent to the pass, they stopped to make camp. The horses were hobbled, and the warm bedrolls laid down. Lance and Crystal curled up together, and the guards took positions at either side of the camp. No fire was lit until false dawn, when a hot cereal was cooked for breakfast. At daybreak they set forth again, and made the pass by noon. Here they paused briefly while Lance and Crystal took in the view. Crystal was thoroughly rapt at the sight of the beautiful, unspoiled country visible from the pass. She opened a small channel of emotional communication to share her feelings with Lance. She was finding that the more she knew Lance, the easier it became to communicate thoughts or emotions with him. Lance returned his feelings to her. Here was a familiar country to him. Somewhere in the vast bowl of the northern valley lay the hamlet where he had been born and where his family yet lived. This country was ringed by mountain ranges such as what they were crossing, but the floor of the basin was broken by a number of canyons, ridges, and other rough country. Men had carved tiny holdings in these lands, mostly for mining, insignificant compared to the vast area of land. The training camp was situated close at hand, easily reachable by late afternoon. They started down the pass, eventually turning off of the carriage road onto a trail that led westward into a narrow defile with steep sides of brown rock which snaked its way along. A stream rushed along beside the trail. Finally, it opened out into a box canyon, and the stream became more placid as well. They rounded a wide bend, and the training outpost came into view. Not far beyond the camp was the head wall of the canyon, with the stream fed by a spectacular cataract. They quickly arrived at the camp and checked in with the factotum, who read the letter that Lance gave him with a succession of reactions, starting with amazement and ending up closer to fear. He grunted. "Be safe enough up here. Hopefully ye've been spirited away quickly and quietly enough. No evil forces up this way that I know. The rough country seems to be a great equalizer in general. I've got some quarters, as should be right for you too. He sized them up with a glance. Levers, eh? Yes, that room'll do just nicely, I'm thinking. The room he showed them was in fact a cozy little room. It wasn't a suite, but it had a wider bed than they were used to, a pair of desks, and a decently large fireplace. The factotum left them to get settled. Quickly they organized their belongings. Crystal brought out her inertial tracker, which now showed their complete track across the pass and into the box canyon. Also among her baggage, fetched from the room by the proctor's aides, were her computer and communicator. The other communicator she had left with the proctor. They toured the facility. It was much like one of the courts around the college, square with a courtyard. They joined the factotum and the other residents for an evening meal. A single trestle table in the small dining room served to seat everyone, though there was ample enough room for many more people. After dinner, 2 students rose to clear the dishes, and the factotum led Lance and Crystal to a small office. They took seats, and he closed the door. Well, this be an odd circumstance for the 2 of ye. Regular college will be suspended for the present time for ye. Around here, we spend most of the day involved in individual research, and towards the evening we get some round-table discussion groups going. Currently, folk here are working on writing these and such like. Sometimes folk come up here to practice dangerous magic away from the town. As far as I'm concerned, ye can practice what magic ye like, seeing as ye are undergraduates and not likely to be at all dangerous. Ye are welcome to join in the discussion as ye like. Ye are here for protection, and likely this be as safe as ye would like. Regular studies will just have to wait. I suggest the 2 of ye do practice magic and develop what skills ye may. I dare say the folk here may be able to advise thee. There be a small library here that perhaps may be of use. Word will be sent when things are sorted out at the college, and ye may return. As you may have noticed, we do not keep a staff here. We'll be asking ye to take care of aught for yourselves, and take turns with the rest of us for the other stuff. You twain look mighty tuckered, possibly sore from the riding. Do turn in early. We rise with the dawn here. They took the advice of the factotum and retired directly. Once in the room, Crystal got out her communicator and signaled to the other comm unit. In a moment, Ian answered. I'm just checking in as you requested, she answered in response to his greeting. We made the journey safely. Any news yet? Ian's voice replied firmly in her ear, as if he were not sure his voice would carry all the way to her. Amazing device, this! Not good, I'm afraid. Cindy is still not talking, and there seems to be some magical shield preventing her from telling any significant information. We are unable to penetrate it. Mistress Amber has made herself scarce, and there are some nasty rumors flying around about this healer's circle that she was a member of. Well, I must go. Good night. She terminated the call and placed the unit in standby mode. The wider bed allowed them to actually lie back side by side. Crystal cuddled up to Lance and spoke softly. Lover, don't you feel that this is just a bit cowardly, our running away from danger like this? Crystal, it's the only thing we could have done. My magical powers aren't worth 2 coppers against the evil forces now present in Crossroads, and thee needs some intensive training before thee can be of any effective use. It just so happens that I also brought a suggested curriculum for thee to follow, skills for thee to practice immediately, and others if there's time. Hopefully the real perpetrators of my abduction will step forward. If Amber turns out to have been involved, then that means that what we're dealing with is a well-established conspiracy. I'm not even sure whether Cindy was employed from the first to divert me, or whether she later turned to aid the dark forces. That's not very reassuring. I know. However, one thing I can assure thee of, thee will be very busy over the next several days scrambling to master some rather intricate spells, and I will be doing my best to solidly establish some journeyman skills. Thee will be attempting to learn master-level skills. Thee seems to have the raw application of power down pat. Now, what thee needs is some fine control over what thee is doing. I brought a few texts that should help thee, and there are others here in the library. Now, let us get some rest. They lay back, and hand in hand, they drifted off to sleep. Early next morning, Crystal woke to the dawn as usual. Remembering what the factotum had said about everyone getting up at dawn, she roused Lance as well, and quickly they dressed and descended into the dining room. A cold breakfast was being served. "Morning, you two. Glad I didn't have to rouse ye." "Lance, thee is looking rather sleepy still, eh? Cold light breakfasts it be here. We don't light fires most of the day except for when it gets really cold. Happens it should be getting real cold here soon. You just came along in a warm spell, that's all. Cold season starts sooner up here. Anyway, a light breakfast is better for the concentration. There'll be more at lunch and plenty at dinner." After breakfast, Lance and Crystal put on some warm cloaks and walked a half a mile or so up the canyon, stopping at a wide sandy spot by a pool in the river. Crystal sat down and made herself comfortable against an old tree stump. She cast out with the spirit sight to see that this location was fairly well served by the spirit threads in the air blowing down in the canyon, in the placid river, and in the earth beneath them. She secured 3 lines, one from each element, placed them where she could reach them handily at need, and began building up power for whatever exercises might be on Lance's list. Lance had been careful not to reveal the nature of what she was intended to do. "Thee will be needing to think quickly and be ready for the unexpected," he had said. Apparently, he had a quick consultation with Mistress Merriweather just prior to their hasty departure. Shivering despite the sunshine, Crystal had Lance place a few pieces of stray dead wood on the sand away from the other combustibles, and she kindled it with magic energy. The warmth from the fire felt good, and Crystal was able, with her spirit sight, to see how the fire drew spirit energy from the wood and the surrounding air, forming a different sort of spirit filament which rose up into the air, eventually reverting to a normal aerial filament. She tried pulling on one of the fire energy filaments, but that made the flames flare up in her direction, and the smoke stung her eyes. Startled, she let the filament go, and the fire settled down. A low chuckle escaped from Lance. "Tried to draw on the fire energy, eh?" He laughed out loud. "Sorry, dearest, but I think I could have told thee what would happen. Happens it mentioned early on as a warning to students. Happens also thee wasn't here to hear it. Oh well, burn thy fingers once, they'll be careful next time." "All the same, it does mean that I can direct the fire's flames. Useful information to know. Now that I'm settled, shall we begin?" Lance got out his sheet of exercises and started in. The first group were familiar enough, and then some more difficult items came along. She had learned to levitate, first of inanimate objects, and then Lance, and finally herself. By remembering to sustain her own energies as well as those of the spell, she was able to maintain hovering a small galaxy of herself, Lance, and a medium boulder, and a host of smaller stones. She kept all in the air for quite some time, subject only to her stomach, which was becoming increasingly hungry. Lance had her revolve the collection, rotate individual items, and finally place the items one by one softly back on the ground. The very last item, a small round stone, she magically flung out over the pond, where it skipped 5 times and sank. Lance dug out a high-energy trail snack for her by way of reward, and when she had eaten, resumed with another grueling exercise. At least the factotum had been right about the light breakfast. Her concentration stayed clear, even when she taxed the limits of her magical skills. Next, she found herself practicing different forms of communication with Lance. For this exercise, they spaced themselves well apart, out of sight and hearing. They went in and out of the dream state, and various partial states, from full dream state with visualization of their surroundings, to a small visual manifestation with otherwise unimpaired vision of the normal surroundings. She practiced moving the small window in the dream state relative to herself, and also practiced controlling what part of the glade it showed. She could have it show herself in the glade, or Lance. Then they practiced communicating without the dream state entirely, a wide variety of different kinds of thoughts and emotions. By the time they rejoined each other after this exercise, she was as hungry as before. The sun stood high in the southern sky, so they returned to the outpost for the midday meal. The luncheon was considered of both high-energy, low-mass foods, as well as light foods high in fiber. Crystal ate moderately as prescribed. Yet the combination was geared to make up for energy loss while not curbing the mental processes too much. Obviously, the afternoon sessions could not be at the same intensity as the mornings, but all in all, she had to admit that it was a regimen conducive to practicing the magical arts for most of the day. The afternoon session was indeed a more relaxed review and repetition of the morning's lessons, concentrating, for example, on the finer points of skipping stones across the pool or transmitting complex images between one another, one transmitting while the other drew a copy of the image received. The last item on Mary's list for the day rather surprised her. It involved having the two enter the dream state for about an hour to answer a list of questions and then discuss the answers. Crystal found the exercise to be a meaningful and insightful one, and the perfect end to an otherwise busy day. They concluded the afternoon with an item not on the program by a session of mid-air lovemaking, this time in the secluded grove on the far side of the river, at roughly treetop level. Somewhere during the day, Crystal had discovered that continued levitation need not entail a continuous drain of her own energy, merely greater concentration during the application of the spell, and slightly greater initial application of personal energy. Thereafter, the spell was self-sustaining and could even be manipulated, as in starting or stopping motions, or changing directions. Crystal spent the last hour before dinner with her computer, carefully entering notes about the day's achievements along with details about the new techniques she had mastered. Dinner was the first meal of the day with any appreciable quality of carbohydrates in it, and more than made up for the lightness of the previous meals. The round table discussion was a lively one, and included some talk about the current situation regarding the encroachment of evil forces and how best to counteract it. Lance and Crystal listened for a while, then joined the conversation with a few tentative remarks. The factotum moderated, but otherwise did not join in. Eventually, the discussion was wound up and everyone retired to their rooms. Again, Crystal checked in with Ian. There was no new news this time, only occasional sightings of Amber, but no success in actually getting any answers to any questions. Crystal closed the communication and joined Lance in bed. They communicated some reassuring feelings between each other, and then went to sleep. The next day's exercises concentrated on attack spells. These were basically two-part spells. The combat readiness phase entailed acquiring a filament of spirit energy and accumulating some energy. The attack phase involved aiming at a target and releasing the attack. The actual form of the attack varied. Objects like stones or knives could be flung at a target, or various types of energy could be directed at the targets. Depending on the type of attack, various effects included whether any light or sound was emitted by the attack, what sort of damage was inflicted, and how much damage or to what degree. As before, Crystal spent the morning achieving the basic skills, then spent the afternoon refining them. Also as before, the last hour of the program involved a discussion conducted in the dream state between the two of them. A different list of questions was used this time, including some that they both concluded would have been quite embarrassing to discuss outside of their private glade. At the conclusion of the day's programmed exercises, Crystal spent a little time teaching Lance to assist with the levitation, and by way of reward they flew to stand on a boulder bordering the water at the very head of the cataract and looked around at the view for the few moments before descending. That evening, during her daily contact with Ian, he revealed some rather disturbing news. Amber had been seen across the pass to the south, obviously heading across the desert. Crystal frowned. "That rather confirms her true allegiance, doesn't it?" Crystal asked. "I'm afraid so," was the proctor's reply. "Does this change my study schedule here in any way?" "It might. How have you been progressing so far?" Crystal started to explain when she was interrupted by Ian. This is rather beyond me. I think perhaps thee should be speaking to Mistress Merriweather. Because she's now the best magic instructor at the college, she has begun acting as headmistress. One moment while I take the phone to her." After a minute of listening to the telephone being jostled, she heard him speak to Mary, and then Mary was speaking. "Hello, dear. So this is one of thy communicators. Ian said he's been communicating with thee, but he didn't say how. We've been forced to adopt a rather secretive atmosphere here in the wake of Lance's kidnapping. The campus has been quiet since, but we do not know that we can trust at this point. Well, dear, how is thee doing with exercises? Crystal called up the notes on her computer and gave a detailed answer. Well, dear, I think I'm correct in my judgment of thy abilities. Things are quiet here for the moment, so I would like for thee to continue with thy programs for a few more days at least. Thee really seems to have the intelligence for this sort of thing. Every so often someone comes from off-planet whose training or education elsewhere facilitates the magic abilities greatly, though I have not done a formal study of exactly what off-planet education is best. More often than not, a visitor develops one or two rather minor skills. Very good, dear. Continue to contact the proctor. He has been giving me regular reports and will continue to do so. I have been appointed headmistress pro tem while Amber has been placed on temporary suspension pending the convening of the full Dean's Council, which will not be for several weeks, at which it is expected that Amber will be barred from the university, and I will most likely be confirmed as the new headmistress unless a more suitable candidate turns up. And frankly, I'm inclined to doubt it. This news has been publicly announced. I felt that thee should hear it. Others at the training outpost will hear about it in weekly news dispatch. Please keep the knowledge of thy communicators private. I do not wish our enemies to suspect technical communications and therefore try technical means of compromising these private messages. Mary passed the phone back to Ian, who wished Crystal good night. Crystal terminated the call. The next day was spent developing a variety of shielding spells. Lance flung a variety of stones and other missiles around her while she developed the skill to deflect them, and then at her to refine the skill. As an adaptation of the shield spell, she developed a confinement spell that was at least watertight. She could deflect liquids aimed in her direction or scoop water out of the lake. Placed overhead, it could act as an umbrella. Crystal even strode through the cataract with only moisture she acquired being the dampness from the rocks, and pushed the water of the pool out of the small area so she could stand on the bottom, perfectly dry, with a wall of water surrounding her up above her head. She could even walk completely under the water with a bubble of air surrounding her and the waters closed over her head. She was able to walk out into the middle of the pond and retrieve an object thrown there by Lance and return to the shore without getting the slightest bit wet. In the afternoon, one of the resident students, a rather amused girl, assisted by firing bolts of magical energy past Crystal, and then full at her while Crystal had developed and refined her shielding abilities. The girl took Crystal aside that evening for a quiet conversation. "Thee's lucky to have such a gentleman as Lance. Oh, I know thee is heart-bonded and all. I know because my spirit sight be well developed. But I've gone through my years of schooling, flitting from boyfriend to the next, and never a one like that me more than to bed me a few times. Walk with me to my room for a moment?" The two girls went upstairs and to the girls' room. Crystal looked around. This girl was one of the long-term residents, spending a semester engaged in research away from the distraction of the college. "I'm simply amazed, really. Here I am in my final semester of graduate work, finishing my doctoral thesis on certain advanced magical skills, and thee has the power to invoke spells that I couldn't begin to contemplate. I've worked years to develop my abilities to this level, and here thee has, with all this power at your fingertips. True, thee'll need a lot of training, but still, I'm envious. Just think what thee'll be capable of when you graduate." Crystal smiled. "I don't know where I got all this power, or the ability to acquire and channel it. From everyone's reactions, it must be special somehow, but to me it's just confusing. I'm doing well to control it to this extent." The last day of program was spent involved in mock combat. Crystal shielded herself from magical and non-magical attacks from Lance and several of the residents, while delivering a variety of attacks to an inanimate target. One of the party did not participate, but monitored Crystal's condition, ready to call an instant ceasefire or even deflect the attacks should her shield waver. The factotum kept a score and carefully evaluated Crystal's performance. Thank you for joining today's episode of Read with Rave. I apologize for my stumbling, but I'm working on reading better, so I appreciate your patience. If you liked, please like, comment down below if you want me to do more of these, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to splash the bell icon so you never miss another video, and I will catch you all on the next wave. Bye!